We're just a couple of days away from the national championship game in college football, and it has me thinking about the teams that were so close to making it to this game but just missed out. I'm talking about Texas and Penn State this season. It has me thinking about all of the other teams in the 4-team playoff era that lost in the semifinals and didn't get a chance to play in the national title game. So I thought it might be a fun video to go through and rank every single team that has lost in the semifinals in the college football playoff era. Now, I know it means something a little different to make the playoffs and make the semifinals in a 12-team playoff versus a 4-team playoff. It's just a little bit of a different era, but I'm still going to put them in the same list just because we have such a small sample size for the 12-team playoffs so far. So without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to sort of reveal these teams in segments here, starting from the bottom and working our way up to the top. And if you see your team at the bottom here, you might feel a little insulted. It might make you upset. After all, your team made the playoffs, so seeing them at the bottom of any list would make someone upset. But you just have to keep in mind, this is very rarefied air. There's a lot of fantastic teams here, and it's a great compliment to have even made the college football playoff because there's a lot of big brands out there that aren't going to be on this list or any list having anything to do with playoffs because they haven't made it yet. So let's start at the bottom and reveal the first 4. At 22, we've got 2015 Michigan State, 2021 Cincinnati, 2018 Oklahoma, and at 19th, we've got 2014 Florida State. So let's take a little bit more of a detailed look at these teams for why they are placed where they are. We start with 2015 Michigan State. They go 12-2 on the season with one loss during the regular season. Their regular season loss was to Nebraska. It was not a very great Nebraska team that they took a loss to, and their staple win was a crazy 17-14 win on the road against Ohio State, which ended up giving them the spot over the Buckeyes in the Big Ten championship game. They then go and they beat Iowa. It was an Iowa team that had a great magical year, and it was basically for a playoff spot. It was a really fun game, but just wasn't a great Iowa team. So they finished the season with 4 ranked wins. Offensively, they were pretty lackluster throughout the season, and it showed when they got to the playoffs. They get beat 38-0 versus Alabama. This is the case of a team that was definitely deserving to make the college football playoff, but if they were actually trying to put the best teams in, they wouldn't have put Michigan State in. They were a team that roster-wise just did not meet the level required to compete at this level, and it's a similar thing to 2021 Cincinnati. They go 13-1. They had the signature win versus Notre Dame during the regular season. I don't think many people doubted they deserved to make it, even though they were a group of 5 team. But by the time they got to the playoffs, they played Alabama from the first quarter onward. You could just tell there was a obvious skill gap. Now, that was a fantastic Alabama team, but it's just tough to ask a Cincinnati team to try and go toe-to-toe with anyone that was in the college football playoff. Maybe if they get a good draw, they had a chance at making, a sort of run or something like that, but Cincinnati's going to fall pretty low on here just because when you're talking about their roster talent, yes, they did have a great season and they did have that win over Notre Dame. They also had a few scares in conference play late in the season, if you remember, like one against Tulsa where it required a goal line stand, and that's something that not a lot of teams on this list have. At 2018 Oklahoma is the next team. They go 12-2 on the year. They have that loss in the regular season to Texas. This just wasn't a very good Big 12 this season, and Oklahoma just sort of ends up being the team that comes out with 1 loss, and they only had 2 ranked wins all season. They just didn't look too good, and it was one of those teams that just did not have a very good defense at Oklahoma, and so they get into this game versus Alabama, and they're just clearly outgunned. They go down 28-0 before they even know what's hit them. They end up scrapping their way back. They still lose by 11, but just a clear collapse from Oklahoma in the playoffs. They were not built for the playoffs. They were not built for this life. It was just a case of a weak Big 12 that produced a weak champion, and they end up losing their opening game. And then we have 2014 Florida State. If you remember the Noles, they are the defending national champions, and they were the cardiac Noles the whole season. They won a ton of one-score games on last-second field goals, crazy late-game heroics, and they get 4 ranked wins. They go undefeated. They don't even have a single blip during the regular season, but it looked really ugly. They get to the postseason. They just get wiped by Oregon, a 59-20 loss. Jimbo Fisher and Jameis Winston, just their playoff lives were over before they could even get started. This produced that iconic fumble clip of Jameis Winston. So a pretty ugly showing by Florida State in the playoffs, and throughout the season, it was just clear they weren't one of the 4 best teams in the country, but they were the defending champions, and they went undefeated in the ACC. So they absolutely deserved the spot, but definitely a rude awakening for them, and that's why they fall lower on this list. So let's go ahead and reveal the next 6 teams on the list. Starting at number 18, we've got 2019 Oklahoma. So 1 year after that 2018 squad, their 2019 squad is right here. It was a very similar regime, very similar era for Oklahoma football. At 17, we've got 2020 Notre Dame. So the COVID year Notre Dame team. At 16 is 2015 Oklahoma. Then we've got 2016 Ohio State, 2024 Penn State, and 2018 Notre Dame. So let's go in and do the breakdown here. Starting with 2019 Oklahoma, very similar story to 2018 Oklahoma. It was still a Lincoln Riley coach team that just did not want to play defense. They were elite offensively. That gets them to the playoffs. They have a couple more ranked wins than that other team. They did have the one lapse versus Kansas State in the regular season, and they get whooped by 2019 LSU. Now, that's not something to be ashamed of. LSU did that to a lot of teams in that season. It was just a tough matchup. They got body bagged. They got blown out. It's really ugly. Their defense was not up to par again under Lincoln Riley. So that is what makes that team end up there. In 2020, we had Notre Dame make the ACC title game, lose to Clemson in that game. They were undefeated prior to that, and then they get to the playoffs and they get wiped by Alabama in the first game. Crimson Tide just kind of took over early. They finished with 2 ranked wins in the season. It was a weird year. It was a COVID year. I'm just not confident that this Notre Dame team would have even made the playoffs if it was not the 2020 season. They just didn't look like they were fully cut out for it, that they had that crazy double overtime win over Clemson, but that was at home, and really whenever they had to play a big game that year, they were not up to the task. So late in the season, they kind of fell apart a little bit. 2015, we have Oklahoma. The Sooners finished with 5 ranked wins, notably more than 2019 or 2018, those iterations of this team. They lost to Texas this year, but this was the first year they had made the CFP. They go up against Clemson. This was one of the Baker Mayfield teams, and they lose 37-17 in a game where Clemson controlled. This is where Clemson started to take over and started to fully realize their potential under Dabo Swinney. And so you can't knock Oklahoma for losing this one. They didn't have as bad of a defense as some of those previous Oklahoma teams that we talked about, or I guess they were later iterations. But in 2015, I think Oklahoma had a little bit more of a defense to be talked about, which is why I wouldn't group them with those other 2 teams. In 2016, we're looking at Ohio State. The Buckeyes were a team that did not go to their conference title game. They went 11-1 during the regular season with that crazy loss to Penn State on the blocked field goal. But because they finished at 11-1, Penn State goes 10-2, makes the Big Ten title game. They give the nod to Ohio State, and that was controversial. Just wasn't an Ohio State team that was very inspiring during the regular season. You look at that loss to Penn State, there were some other ugly games they had in there. They did have 4 ranked wins technically, but they get to the postseason and they just get slammed by Clemson, 31-0. So I think the Buckeyes showed, yeah, maybe Penn State probably should have gotten the nod, but I understand why they did what they did. But the Nittany Lions had the head-to-head. This is one that's going to bother me if I'm a Penn State fan for a long time. In 2024, this last season, we have the Penn State entry here. They go 13-3. It's crazy they played 16 games in the season. They had 3 ranked wins, but I put an asterisk next to that because 2 of them came during the postseason. That's pretty jarring to see. Now, depending on how you calculate ranked wins, you might give them a couple more for the regular season, but as far as teams that were currently ranked during the regular season, when they beat them, they only had 1, which is the lowest of any team on this list during the regular season. But what I will say is they at least were able to go toe-to-toe versus the elite competition they played. Against Ohio State and Notre Dame, they had an early lead. Against Oregon, they went toe-to-toe. You can't say that about every team on this list. There are other teams that lost those games in pretty big blowout fashion. Penn State was at least competitive, and they're a couple plays away, like 1 play away from us talking about Penn State in the national title game in 2024, instead of what we're talking about now, which is a team that lost in the semifinals. In 2018, Notre Dame finished with a 12-1 record, so another Notre Dame team that goes undefeated during the regular season. 4 ranked wins, really impressive, no losses there, but their schedule was a little bit questionable despite the 4 ranked wins, and then once again they get to the CFP and they just get body bagged by Clemson 30-3. So it's another case where a great season and a great resume is really soured by the end season result that they faced, and it's the reason that we're not really talking about Notre Dame falling higher on this list, but still 13th, nothing to be ashamed of in a list as elite as this. So it's time to reveal the next 6 teams that are on the list. Starting at number 12, we've got 2021 Michigan, the Wolverines, first time making it under Jim Harbaugh. 2020 Clemson in at 11. We've got 2023 Alabama. So this is notably Clemson and Alabama's first times appearing on this list. As we know, those Dabo and Nick Saban teams were pretty dang good and kind of a step above. At 9, we've got 2024 Texas, which might surprise some of you, but I'll explain my reasoning in just a second. Then we've got 2016 Washington and another Texas team in 2023 Texas. So we'll start with 2021 Michigan. They finished with a 12-2 record. The one loss to Michigan State and Kenneth Walker during the regular season, where he just went off and ran all over the place. And to me, that was a microcosm of Michigan's season, where they just had a little bit too much vulnerability and a little bit too many chinks in the armor. And so they get the 2 ranked wins. They obviously get the emphatic win over Ohio State. That was huge for them. But the second they face top tier competition in Georgia, they get pile drive 34-11. So it was clear that the Wolverines were not built for that big of an opponent and were not ready for that yet under Jim Harbaugh. Still a fantastic team that hit a lot of their goals in the season, but definitely got blown over by Georgia, which takes us to 2020 Clemson, another COVID year team. It was a weird year. Clemson was really excellent and really talented, but the elephant in the room is, yes, the blowout loss to Ohio State. Ohio State spanked them. That's a really good Ohio State team in 2020 that ends up getting beat by an even better Alabama team in 2020. So there were some good teams that year, but really it was the lapse versus Notre Dame. It's the fact that Clemson only had to go on the road 4 times, and they only had 2 ranked wins on the season and go 10-2. So that all sours their resume just a little bit for me in that season. Makes it easy to rank them where they are, despite the fact that they were a super talented team. 2023 Alabama is another one on here. They were very inconsistent. They lose that game to Texas early in the season. They have a really ugly showing versus South Florida. People thought this team wouldn't even sniff the playoffs, but they go on a crazy run and they beat Georgia and they get to the playoffs. And because of that upside that they flashed late in the season and the 4 ranked wins they had and some of those calibers of wins, I think you've got to put them pretty decently high on this list. They do end up falling to Michigan, but hey, that's the Michigan team that ends up winning the national title, and they were pretty dang close to taking them out. I mean, they were one quarterback power play working away from taking that game to another overtime and potentially winning that one. So the Crimson Tide in this season maybe were disappointing at the time, but it was a pretty dang good team. And so they're going to earn a pretty high spot at number 10 on this list. We've got 2024 Texas, who finishes 13-3, the same record that we saw Penn State finish with this last season. Again, we've got the 6 ranked wins with the asterisk because 2 of those came in the college football playoff in the 2 opening rounds. Their final loss was 28-14 to Ohio State. Nothing to be ashamed of. They were in that game. They were at the goal line with the chance to tie it. Ohio State forces the scoop and score. And outside of that, their 2 losses were 2 losses to Georgia. And it was a Georgia team at relatively high strength. I know that obviously Gunnar Stockton has to come in because Beck gets injured in the SEC title game, but still a Texas team that was able to go toe-to-toe versus the top-tier competition. I feel like there were some other dynamics at play in those games. Still a really excellent team that navigated a difficult schedule, and the ranked wins speak for themselves, I think. And I just look at that team, and I look at how inconsistent 2023 Alabama was. I look at all the other circumstances 2020 Clemson did, and yes, they do have the extra loss during the regular season, but I think I would favor 2024 Texas over those guys, but I will acknowledge the margins are pretty small. You could probably pretty easily convince me maybe 2024 Texas belongs down at like 11 instead of 9. But now we're at 2016 Washington, which I think is going to be one of the most underrated teams in this list. People don't remember just how good this team was. They were absolutely scorching during the regular season. They had such an electric offense led by Jake Browning. They win the Pac-12 title. Their one loss was to a scorching red-hot USC team late in the season, and then they show up versus Alabama, and they were in that football game. I know revisionist history might tell you otherwise, but Bama had a punt return touchdown. I believe they had a defensive score in this one. They end up winning by 17. The Huskies had the lead in this game, 7-3 on a John Ross touchdown at the start of the game. So Washington was legit this season. They just ran into one of those staple, insanely good Nick Saban Alabama teams where there wasn't much they could do, but if it was a different season, this Washington team was good enough to win a national title, and I'll stand by that. And that's true for a lot of the teams that are up this high on the list. And it takes us to number 7, which is the Texas Longhorns in 2023, where they go 12-1 and win a conference title with one loss to Oklahoma on a crazy play. It was a classic game. Gabriel has the game winner at the end there, but the Longhorns finished with 4 ranked wins. They navigated a difficult Big 12 schedule, and then they get to the College Football Playoff and played in a classic versus the Washington Huskies. That Washington Huskies team was a team of destiny that was going to make it to the national title game no matter what happened that year. So you can't blame Texas too much, but I do think this Texas team was better than this last year's Texas team we saw, and it's because they were more complete by the end of the season, just had a few more playmakers. The war of attrition was hitting them less hard, whereas Texas this last season didn't have as good of a running game, and so I trusted 2023 Texas better. Also, Quinn Ewers was playing a lot better, and I think their quarterback play was just much better in 2023, which is why the Longhorns get that spot at number 7. So we are into the top 6 teams that lost in the college football playoff semifinals, and we'll start it off with number 6, 2017 Clemson, number 5, Ohio State in 2022, who lost to Michigan in 2022, who gets spot number 4. At 3, we've got 2014 Alabama. 2 is 2017 Oklahoma, and the number 1 team, 2019 Ohio State, and I don't think it's particularly close. Let's talk about each of them, though, starting with 2017 Clemson. They go 12-2. They have the weird loss, the upset loss, crazy loss to Syracuse in the regular season, but they recover. The jarring stat here, 6 ranked wins. They were just running roughshod through an extremely talented ACC. They looked really good for the most part. There was that lapse versus Syracuse, and the offensive inconsistency was because Kelly Bryant was at quarterback, but the defense this year, it was a championship defense. They were elite. They lose 24-6 versus Alabama. There were some things thrown in the mix there, like poorly timed turnovers, I believe a defensive touchdown by Alabama. So they win 24-6. It was an extremely good Alabama team in 2017, and so Clemson does end the season with an ugly loss, but if you look at what they did during the regular season, there's no denying that was an elite squad that was very excellent that season. Just had some deficiencies offensively. Next, we have 2022 Ohio State. Ohio State in 2022, this is another year where they did not go to the conference title game, but they still made the CFP. It's because they lose that last game to Michigan, which bars them from the Big Ten title game. Michigan also makes the CFP, so you've got Bama on one side of the bracket playing Georgia, Michigan on the other side playing TCU. Now, or I should say Ohio State. Ohio State only had 2 ranked wins that year. Same with Michigan, only 2 ranked wins. Michigan is the head-to-head, so that obviously puts them above Buckeyes. But you just look at these teams, and you knew they were excellent. They were extremely talented. Both teams that I think were capable of making something happen and winning it all. And Ohio State nearly takes out Georgia, gives them their best punch, just couldn't get it done. I really think that showed the mettle of this Ohio State team. They had what it took, and they were so close. A missed field goal away. And then Michigan, they just sort of had a flop defensive performance versus TCU, which was pretty shocking to see because we just watched them have an insane defensive performance versus Ohio State. So TCU, another one of those teams of destiny that showed in that game. At number 3, we've got 2014 Alabama, which reminds me a lot of 2017 Clemson, an elite defense, but offensively, just some deficiencies that really ended up costing them. And so they lose 42-35 to Ohio State. This was the elite Ezekiel Elliott performance. Bama's only regular season loss was to Ole Miss in that game, and they had 5 ranked wins. They had a really difficult, tough, deep SEC this season. So 2014 Alabama deserves a lot of credit for what they did. They just ran into a team of destiny in Ohio State, and you cannot knock them for that. At number 2, we've got 2017 Oklahoma. This Sooners team, nowhere near some of the other Sooners teams on this list. I mean, there's 3 others that fall at 16th, 18th, and 20th. This one all the way up at number 2 because this was the team of destiny. This was Baker Mayfield and Oklahoma running through the Big 12 Conference. They have one blip on the radar versus Iowa State, but outside of that, they dominated. They finished with 4 ranked wins. They play Georgia. They come out swinging versus a very good Georgia team, top tier competition. They have the lead. They're in control in this game, and Georgia just wills themselves back in this game. They end up winning in overtime 54-48. And once again, even though I think this was one of the best Lincoln Riley defenses at Oklahoma, it was the defense that ended up costing them. It cost them a shot at a national title, and I really think this Oklahoma team could have won a national title had they gotten past Georgia here, and I think they showed they had championship DNA. But that takes us to number 1, and as I alluded to before, it's not even close. 2019 Ohio State is the best team to lose in the semis and not even make the national championship game in the college football playoff era. I mean, they go undefeated during the regular season, pretty much body bag every single team they play. They've got 5 ranked wins on there. They look excellent, nothing going against them, and then they run into little old Dabo Swinney and little old Clemson, and there were a lot of crazy factors in this game, a lot of big swing plays, and Ohio State had control in the early going of this one, was in complete control. The momentum shifts on that crazy quarterback draw by Trevor Lawrence, and Clemson just manages to steal this one from Ohio State. It was a crazy game and a crazy loss for the Buckeyes, and I really would have loved to see 2019 Ohio State play 2019 LSU. That would have been a pretty elite clash, but the Buckeyes come up just short, and they earn the spot that I don't know if you want, which is the number 1 team in college ball playoff history to lose in the semifinals. That is all for this video. Just was one of the things that was on the top of my mind. Like, I wonder what it looks like if you rank every team that lost in the semis. Let me know down in the comments if there's other videos you want me to make. I know for a fact that after we finish the national title game, I'll make a video on all of the runners-up in the college football playoff era. That involves the 4-team era and this last season as well. And I've got a couple other ideas cooking. I know some of you saw the poll I put out there about some potential future videos. I might just end up doing all of those ones that I put on the poll, but it's in terms of preference of what you guys want to come out first. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm really enjoying making these with the new setup and all that stuff. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. We're almost at 15,000. Let's keep pushing. Let's go to 20. Let's not be satisfied. And like I said, that's all I got, and I will see you guys later this week.